All right. Uh, Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. Um, on today's webinar, we're speaking about red team assessments, which essentially would help expose security blind spots. My name's Aditya. I'm the co-founder of Accorian. A lot of experience in pen testing and compliance delivery over the years. I have Ashrita. I'll let her introduce herself.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hi, I'm Ashrita. I lead Accorian's pen testing services. I have over 13 years of experience in security testing in both consulting and product security in the realm of security testing. Thanks, Satya. Over to you.
Thank you. So before we go ahead, I want to do a quick introduction for those of you who may not know who Accorian is. Accorian is a full service global cybersecurity company. We essentially help organizations maneuver the security by providing compliance, audit, testing, and strategy services. We work in regulated industries like health, fintech, etc. Right. So for today, Ashita's brought up the slide where we're talking about a couple of things about red teaming. The entire intention is to give you a quick one-on-one on, what is the meaning of red teaming, and going up all the way up to a Q&A at the end. So on today's webinar, Ashita is going to break down, the various key elements of what constitutes a red team assessment, right? Why is it the need of the hour? Why is it important for organizations of today, right? She's also going to, dive deep into one such methodology that we utilize at Accorian. She also has one case study to share with the audience, followed by a Q&A session where you can ask questions. There is a chat uh, option here. So you can definitely utilize that to send in your questions. We can take it, at the end, but feel free to send your questions during the entire webinar, right? So on red teaming assessments, right? I've heard a lot of definitions in the last, 2, 3 years, right? So Ashrita, if you can quickly tell us, what is the real definition of red team assessments and what does it entail in.
Right. A lot of definitions for sure. We have one such on the screen as well. So the definition of NIST is there. To put it in simple words, red team assessment just mimics what a real attacker or a real world attacker would do. Bluntly put, in a red team assessment, we would go all out to compromise an organization or the assets of the organization. So this is an exercise that is performed by skilled team of security testers or red teamers, if I may, who, along with understanding the tactics, techniques, and procedures to break into the systems for sure, also have the capability or the ability to think like an attacker. Red teaming is purely objective focused assessment, unlike a pen test. So we'll talk more about what I mean when I say objective focus. But it's it's mostly not restricted to just a technology, but also includes the people aspect. And because of the nature of the assessment or the way it's done, this provides organizations or CXOs with a more realistic understanding of the security posture and not just give a number, to the vulnerabilities number of highs, lows, mediums, not just that, but it helps CISO's nightmare. The question that keeps, I think, most CISOs awake at night is whether they can be breached by attackers. That question gets answered uh, to a good extent. And the preparedness of an organization in case of a potential attack, and also to assess the controls, the security controls that are in place in tandem with because of these simulations is what a red team assessment is done for.
Got it. Thank you for breaking it down. You spoke about some key questions that CXOs typically have, right? Um, One of the questions typically is, and what are the big questions that one can help answer on red team assessments via red team assessments? You said one was whether you can be breached. Another one is whether the controls both on the detection and response side are working in tandem, right? But then most often organizations will also state that, hey, I get my penetration test done, right? So and I've often heard red team assessments being confused for a penetration test. So can you just quickly highlight how is it different? How's a red team assessment different from an exploitative penetration test?
Get it right. It, I mean, from the definitions, or when during discussions, it may seem that both pen testing and red team assessments are meeting similar objectives, but that's not really true. Uh, Pen testing is typically used to, or is performed to identify all vulnerabilities or misconfigurations in a scope area of either the infra or say particular application or a product. Like if I'm performing a pen test on an application, then I'll identify all the vulnerabilities that are present on that application. And of course, that means anything outside of that application or that domain is not in the scope of the test. So, because of this, pen testing becomes very restrictive with the scope. On the other hand, we have red team assessments where you get coverage. So, as a real world attacker, if someone was wanted to attack an organization, of course, there would be no boundary or a limit based on, okay, this domain is out of scope for me, I should not attempt. So all of those thoughts don't happen. It's That's exactly what a red team assessment does as well. So they wouldn't uh, during an assessment, the team wouldn't restrict themselves from dropping a shell in an application uh, which does not belong to a particular subdomain of the company because it's not part of the scope, right? Which would be the case in case of a pen testing. At the end of the day, the objective is, say, for example, to gain a foothold into the internal network and dump data. Then, no matter what, the red team assessors or the team goes after it, exactly like how a real world attacker would, without any restrictions in place or without any such boundaries in place.
Gotcha. Okay. So a couple of key takeaways that I understood was there are no limitations. Everything is in scope, and you're basically going to leverage every TTP tactic, technique, and procedure that attackers would utilize. Um, most often organizations have robust vulnerability management programs. They define that, hey, we're going to do our penetration tests once a year or twice a year, right? Where would a red team assessment fit into that kind of schedule?
So this goes back to the objectives, partially of what each of them meet. So we talked about how pen testing is restrictive in terms of scope and vulnerabilities and identifying misconfiguration specific to the target. So if you need a more realistic answer to questions like whether I can be breached, or say, how will my blue team respond in case there is a breach? Then, irrespective of the number of PTs you've performed, right? Because generally you're whitelisted. So, no PT or no VA will help you answer those questions. So, to actually understand the impact of the vulnerability beyond the context of that target, say we identify a vulnerability in the application which in the context of the application may seem like it's a low risk vulnerability or at max a medium, but the same vulnerability, when you consider the bigger picture or look at various other targets or the entire infra on the whole, may have a big role to play in being able to or have a huge impact on the overall security of the organization, right? We have one such example. We'll talk about it, but in a nutshell, this is why you would want to add red team assessment into your security program.
Got it. Got it. And I just want to have one little, you know, in penetration test, typically, you mentioned that all vulnerabilities are going to be detected, right? So customers or, end organizations could very well ask a question that, why would I need to go ahead with the red team assessment? Especially if they're saying that, you found all the vulnerabilities, I've gone ahead and remediated it, right? As part of my, vulnerability management program, my SLA says I'm going to remediate this in 3 months, right? So will a red team assessment still be uh, apt?
Great question. Uh, The red team assessment does latch on to vulnerabilities that have been identified in a pen test as well, right? So because you have the report, you know there are vulnerabilities, and you know that they're easily identifiable. You know that you can use certain issues that you have identified uh, to gain initial foothold. But it's not just these vulnerabilities that are discovered during the test, because the attack landscape automatically just increases, right? It's not it's the entire organization in that case. So there could be misconfiguration anywhere else. The attack paths could include, say, lack of awareness in uh, in the employees, or you may have all the security controls and security devices in place, but your employee may just click on a link or connect a USB that they found, which could lead to, which could be the entry point for an attacker. Or say you have a great password policy, but the password of few employees were leaked in a third party breach, like not even, like a completely random security breach where they have registered themselves using an email address, and that has been breached. So that data could be useful. So these are not things that are covered in a pen test, but this information is scouted for in a red team assessment. So you will still need red team assessment. It's pretty much like getting your blood work done, right? Or say getting vaccinated. You can either choose to do it after something comes and breaks your entire system and possibly disrupt your daily life, or get it done before something happens to ensure you're uh, prepared for an event which is not very unforeseen at this point, because you're aware of certain misconfigurations or limitations that you have, and
Right.
you're gearing towards it, remediating those. So red team assessment works exactly the same. You can identify it when an attacker is at your door, carrying out an attack, or you can be prepared, harden your system, identify those before you've been attacked.
Gotcha. All right. Sounds good. Great. I see a bunch of
Oh, yes.
reasons why red teaming is important. I want to start with, of course, you spoke about the misconfigurations, real world simulation, enhanced incident response. Uh, those are, of course, great, requirements. I mean, great advantages of doing a red team assessment. But on the compliance requirement front, right? Um, can you shed some light on that? And what do compliance requirements kind of talk about red team assessments vis-a-vis pen testing?
Well, not a whole lot of compliance specifically mandate red team assessments for sure, but NIST 853 does specifically call requirement for a red team assessment. So anything that uses NIST 853, it percolates down, right? It's required. And FedRAMP also calls that out specifically, that for FedRAMP, you need to have to carry out red team assessment. While other certifications, specifically for PCI, although it does not mandate it, uh, at this point, I believe it will soon, because the primary focus of PCI DSS is to establish security controls and best practices, protect cardholder data, right? In today's landscape, which we already talked about, carrying out a pen testing alone does not ensure or does not guarantee that kind of security, because you're only looking at probably an environment that has cardholder data. But we're also doing segmentation checks. But what about other segments which do not have sensitive information, but could possess some information that would allow us to bypass the controls in place, right? So looking at it holistically, to be equipped to protect this data is really essential. So to answer your question straight, FedRAMP and NIST 853 does mandate it, but the rest of them I'm sure will follow along soon.
Gotcha. No, that's good to know. Okay, so I think we've kind of spoken about the importance of red team assessments. You know, you spoke about answering and addressing some key CXO and board level questions, right? Would you be able to speak through some of those examples?
Um, so say you have okay, most cases, although security is not an afterthought like it was previously, security is considered important, but we know that releasing functionalities or having functionalities out is still important. And maybe during such a time, the dev team or the engineering team decides to make certain workarounds to make their feature or functionality workable at that point because of some QA issue that may have come up. They would probably attach a temporary policy that would uh, give elevated access to a normal user, and
Yeah.
the thought would possibly be that in the next few days or in the next sprint we will revoke access. But these things, we're all aware that does not happen. It goes back I mean, it's only looked at when an incident occurs. So these things are not looked at in a pen test. So identifying such misconfigurations, and then we also talked about it, right? You can have password policy in place, and then I think mostly even with CXOs. If somebody's lost their phone or do not have access to, say, uh, their phone at that point in time and want to access something where MFA is enabled, they would possibly call the IT and be like, can you just disable this for, a half an hour? And then that half an hour just doesn't end. So these are things that happen because, not because somebody particularly wants, has a malicious intent, but it just happens accidentally and is never looked at. So these are things that usually come up.
Gotcha. Okay, awesome. So I think we've kind of nailed down the importance. I'd love to know more about how, from a methodology standpoint, are we, or how do red team assessments to simulate attackers, and what kind of methodology, or what's the method to the madness here?
Madness for sure, but we do have there are multiple approaches. There are different approaches to carrying out a successful red team assessment. At Accorian, we use the feed or the S3 EAD methodology in combination with MITRE ATT&CK framework. So this begins with the find phase. So essentially, this sort of sets the tone for the engagement. This is a goal setting activity where we collaborate with the stakeholders to discuss and mutually establish what the objective of the assessment would be, right? So let's say compromising a business critical server is what we've decided. So in the next phase, we look at gathering as much intel as we can on all the assets and understanding the attack surface. I think that's something I've been emphasizing on. The attack surface becomes so much larger since you don't have restriction, since you don't have a specific target. Everything that the organization owns is the attack surface, including the people. So we try and enumerate everything that we can, and most often we've seen things that the stakeholders are not even aware of. They've assumed that it has been disrupted, but no, they're just there. Someone's forgotten to do it. So all of these things. So this allows the team to make an informed decision, and also it's one of the most important phases to for the to get your ball rolling on what your attack would look like, right? Uh, uh, so to break it down into extremely simple weaknesses, I'm going to take examples of, say, we've enumerated list of employees, and in the recon, we were able to from the data dumps identify credentials, from previous breaches that may have happened, and then we keep growing the intel and try to enumerate as much as we can. So once we're comfortable that we have enough data at this point, then we progress to the next step, where we're devising uh, an attack path based on all the intel we have. So what essentially is happening is we're putting all the small pieces that we've got, and then trying to have a picture. We're trying to stitch everything together and uh, have an attack path to meet the objective. Like we discussed, say, certain compromising certain critical server. So let's say, for example, we find SSH service open, and we found some credentials. Then the attack path or the plan would be to attempt to log in, right? We're not doing it yet, but we're all sitting together and discussing what we could do, putting all little pieces together and devising that plan. So once the plan is in place, of course, the next obvious thing to do would be to exploit. So here we execute the device plan. We attempt to use the credentials, and if we succeed, then great. We have an initial foothold. But if we don't, then we go back to relooking at all the pieces we've identified, and then maybe fine tune or make readjustments to the attack surface based, and also based on the intel. When we're exploiting, we're learning new things, right? Everything that we're learning, we're absorbing and using that to sort of fill in the little gaps that are present. And there's a cyclic or a continuous phase, if I may, where a lot of revisions happen, where a lot of modifications happen until we manage to compromise the critical server that we set out to. And the final phase, of course, is translating everything that we've observed and transforming it into actionable intel that would allow organizations to understand the attack surface, the attack path, the misconfigurations that we identified along the way. And the report would talk about also the detection capabilities, or how the blue team responded to the attack. So this information sort of uh, empowers the stakeholder uh, with information that would possibly allow them to make strategic security decisions.
Gotcha. No, that makes sense. I think the entire phased approach, I think, definitely aids to the success of red team assessment. At least, like we said, there's a method to this entire madness, right? So from start to finish,
Absolutely.
the recon to all the way into disseminate, where you put everything together, you could chain all of these things together and then go after the outcome.
No,
I think the
absolutely. When we start finding, I'm
other,
sorry, when we start finding information, we're so uh, uh, you're so excited to start trying them and start exploiting already. But I think being stealthy is also one of the key aspects of red team assessment. So we'll have to have a proper plan in place before we start the exploitation. So yeah,
Interesting.
it really
Yeah.
helps.
Yeah. No, I think that's what enables us or enables red teamers to really achieve that objective, right? The objective is what, or the flag is what one is after, right? Um, okay. Now that we've understood the methodology, I think the big question is of value, right? And the value would be, value of doing a red team assessment, and what outcome-driven metric can it give to a CXO or a board member on why a red team assessment is good and needs to be conducted, and it aids in them understanding, what is their true security posture.
Right. So due to the nature of the assessment, right, which we've all established is to mimic the real world attack. This allows executive leadership team to understand the possibility of the organization to be breached. So in case of such an attempt, it also allows the team to understand the capabilities of the blue team to identify and also respond to such an attack. It allows organizations to be prepared for such an incident. And of course, the cost. This helps to get a realistic understanding of what an attacker can get, uh, what an attacker can, get to, what is the kind of data that they can get to, and how much would would that attack cost if an attacker is able to expand and get to the critical data or the system versus how much it would cost to actually remediate that, right? So potentially talking about what is the cost of breach versus what is the cost of remediating or having security uh, uh, devices in place. So uh, so it also so when we're discussing all of this with the stakeholders, it also helps organization understand who the attackers would be and what is it in the organization that they would be after. Also, of course, the security awareness and the effectiveness of the controls that are in place, which would translate to return on investment on the security spends that happen. So I think typically these are things that can be addressed with a red team assessment.
Gotcha. So I think multifold, right? And
Yeah.
uh, questions that can be answered. Interesting. Out of these, I mean, what's been the number one question that you've got in your experience, right? Like, as the big burning question that why folks are getting red team assessments. If you could pick that one question.
I think it would be what is the possibility of us being breached? Primarily because I think until recently, almost all companies thought that they won't be breached. It'll be
Yeah.
somebody else,
Yeah.
just until it happens with them.
Yes. Yes.
So, what is the likelihood of my company being breached? And also, yeah, I think that would be one question since you asked one.
Awesome. No, thank you. All right. So, now that we've truly understood what red team assessments are, every organization is unique. Their threats, their crown jewels, their current risks, their big board questions are different, right? Um, how, so the uniqueness, of course, will go into building of scenarios of flags for the red team assessment. So, you know, could you share some common scenarios that organizations opted for last year for conducting, for red team assessments?
Of course. Uh, I mean, it's like you rightly pointed out, right? It's going to be unique for each organization. And we have multiple rounds of discussion with stakeholders before finalizing the scenario to understand uh, what exactly their requirement is. So, which was also the first phase that we talked about in our methodology. So, in a broad sense, I would bucket it into the six categories here. So, of course, the infamous compromise of AD, and rightly so, right? It continues to be the top scenario because, in every sense, it's the keys to the kingdom. The next, I think, is going to be obtaining access to isolated network. Uh, I mean, this is a scenario that is most relatable to clients, especially the clients who are globally distributed, which means that there are people accessing the infra from across the globe. So there might be specific data that not everyone should be allowed to access, right? Maybe due to the nature of the information or merely because it's a compliance requirement that somebody who's not in a certain geolocation should not be able to access it. So if say if you have a offshore team that works on a product, but they themselves cannot access the production data, I think that would be so gaining access to an isolated network or a sensitive network would be another scenario. And then C-level exec email access or any kind of access that executives have. So like I talked about a couple of minutes back, uh, usually leadership team has a lot of sensitive data. They have I think in an organization they contain they're the ones having a lot of privileged information, but also because their execs the IT team sort of becomes a little liberal. They can just pick up the phone and be like, can you relax this for a couple of days, MFA, or it could be anything. But that opens up a huge attack surface. So getting access to execs is one other scenario. Uh, Similarly, exfiltration of sensitive data or say backdooring of application. I may gain access to an application server or any sensitive server, but does it allow me to have continued access? Will I have persistent access? And will this be picked up and alerted by the blue team? Uh, so if it doesn't, then there's a big problem, right? So that's another scenario. And then, of course, compromise of business critical servers. So these are some of the scenarios that we generally recommend as well from our experience. And of course, they're customized based on specific asks from stakeholders or, after understanding problem statements that they want to address or why they want to do a readiness assessment.
Gotcha. Okay. I see something very interesting here. I see this is a mix of you know, external attacks and internal attacks. Could you just throw some light into that, or external attack simulation, internal assume breach attack simulation?
Yeah, so there are two ways of doing an entire red team assessment. One would be with absolutely zero access, zero knowledge. All you get is the name of the company, and that's about it. Everything else you figure out on your own and try to gain initial foothold and then land and expand into the network and see where you can get to. The second way of doing this would be an assume breach scenario where you're assuming that a breach has occurred and somebody has got or an attacker has got the initial foothold. So in this case, as red teamers, we would need access to your internal network. So we start from there. We get access to the network as a normal employee of the organization with access similar to that of any other employee that they would have, right? Not privileged access. So I would be accessing the network as an employee of, say, organization XYZ. So that, and then I would go see to what level I can penetrate and see what information I can access from there, how I could elevate my privilege and then traverse and pivot laterally in the network.
Gotcha. So I'm guessing these scenarios actually answer very different questions, right? Can you be attacked
They
from the
do.
external perimeter as compared to if you have a compromised endpoint, a rogue employee, how bad could,
Absolutely.
things be, essentially simulating the land and expand uh, method that attackers follow today. All right, awesome. So, the scenarios, of course, help, but could you take us through I know you have one case study, so if you could just take us through the case study which talks about how did this really impact an organization, and what kind of value did they get in the end?
Of course. So one of our clients, this is about a case study of one of our clients who we've been doing a lot of pen tests. So this is a large fintech company with roughly about 2,000 employees spread across the world, headquartered in the US. We've been working with them for a couple of years now. And we were, of course, talking about what more we should do to understand true security. Uh, so that's when the CISO, sort of talked about these things that largely worries him. Uh, the same question, right? How susceptible am I, or is the organization to a real world attack? And in the worst case that I get attacked, uh, what and somebody gains an initial foothold, of course, to what extent would that attacker be able to pivot internally, and what is it that can be compromised? Uh, so to just give a background of the tests that we've performed, we've regularly performed application pen tests, and we've tested the cloud infra. We've carried out configuration reviews. We've tested the mobile app. We do a continuous scan in the environment. But these are all performed in silos, right? These are specific to the target, like how a pen test would be. Uh, but So everything that's identified is in the context of that target, and most of the vulnerabilities, especially the lower ones, were pushed that we will fix it in 3 months, which is very normal since it's a low risk issue. So then, when we recommended doing a red team assessment, uh, so we started with the find phase where we were trying to enumerate information. So we found a subdomain that we've never tested, and we identified that it was vulnerable to SSRF attack. And the application that we had tested and we have been testing in the last test revealed internal URL, right? Which in a pen test report, because we were not able to access the internal URL, of course, the risk rating of that was low. So, but now since we had SSRF, the URL was no longer inaccessible. We were able to access the internal portal, the endpoint. So that portal leaked some private keys and credentials, like a whole lot. So it was something, it was a portal that was used internally uh, for just for internal purposes. So there were credentials there, although not a good practice, but it was just present, right? Uh, so now we attempted to use the credentials and key in the internal network to manage to get access to other systems in the network. So while all of these misconfigurations contributed to the attack, something that when we did a pen test seemed insignificant because in the context of that application, it did not seem like it was a critical issue, but that played a pivotal role in the bigger picture, right? Also, we performed social engineering attacks on specific team members from a lot of employees, but specifically in marketing, sales, and HR. Usually it's the engineering team that gets targeted, but it was, I think we tend to forget that the sales team, the HR team, and marketing team have a lot of sensitive information that they have access to. While some of the employees did reach out to the security and tell them that, and sort of notified that they're seeing uh, emails that don't look normal. But there were a few of them who executed the file because it read leads, qualified leads, which may have interested them. So that also allowed us to gain initial foothold in another way. So highlighting the importance of security awareness among people, along with identifying findings in the infra and applications and all of that, because organizations are not just made of infrastructure, right? It's also people. So it's essential that all of them are tested, and there's awareness about things that should be done and should not be.
Gotcha. All right. Case definitely highlights, what a multi-chain attack across the organization can actually lead to, rather than looking at very scope-based penetration test, which is done, once a year or, twice a year, right? With that said, I'd like to quickly summarize a couple of things that, Ashutosh shared today. Red team assessments, like she shared, is a simulation of attacks. It uses the same techniques, tactics, and procedures that attackers use in the real world. This is driven by flags or scenarios that are written up for an organization, basis their threat, risks, crown jewels, and the type of organization they are. Right. These are different from pen tests because they are not bound by scope, and they're also not, very focused for a particular time period. Right. So no rules as such. While there is a rules of engagement document that is signed as part of the red team assessment, but nothing is out of scope without it bringing down anything. Right. In terms of the top scenarios, we saw some scenarios that Ashutosh shared. We saw the AD, Active Directory, take over as the number one. We saw some of them which were external, some of them which were emulating and simulating an internal attacker or a compromised endpoint, right? So with that, thank you, Ashita. I wanted to quickly open the floor up for any questions that folks might have. Feel free to share them. I see that there are a few questions already. So while the others add some of the questions, Ashita, I want to start with the first question, which is what's the duration of a typical red team assessment, and how the prerequisites different from a penetration test? Uh,
Great question. So a red team assessment is generally time based. So it's typically 2 to 3 weeks, while I'm saying 2 to 3 weeks. It is also dependent on the size of the organization. So these are discussed, and it's explained to the stakeholders about what can be and cannot be done, depending on how big or small the company is, and also depends on the uh, number of users and stuff, right? So typically, 2 to 3 weeks. If it's a bigger organization, then runs for about 4 to 6 weeks at the most.
Gotcha. What
So
and the
that's about the time.
prerequisites?
And yeah.
Yes, yes.
And the prerequisites for pen testing, we need all the details regarding the target. Whereas for red team assessment, if it's from the external perimeter, there's nothing that we need. Just, I think, approval from stakeholders. But if it's an assume breach approach, which we talked about, then we need access to the organization as a normal employee. Like, so I'm able to access systems of the organization inside the infrastructure as a normal employee. So that's what we need.
Gotcha. All right. Uh, no, that helps. I'm going to move to the next question because a few here. Um, how do you ensure production is not impacted and there's no data loss, right? And how do you conduct exploitative tests without impacting downtime?
Great question. Something that all of us are worried about, right, when we're carrying out any test. So uh, again, this goes back to having red team assessment being a collaborative effort. If there are systems in place that are sensitive, or if there are systems in place because of compliance requirement that we should not be able to access even as part of an assessment, then a canary system is put in place usually with flags, and the host name is provided. So the target becomes only those canary systems. It does not change much in terms of the attack because it'll still be placed in a simulated environment similar to that of the production environment.
Gotcha. Okay. Sounds good. There's another question which says, d do red team assessments include social engineering testing?
Red team assessment would include, but in case in case a client is specifically asked for exclusion of the people factor, then that wouldn't. But typically we would include a social engineering aspect as well.
Gotcha. I just want to add to Ashita's point. She illustrated that sometimes, certain organizations might want to exclude social engineering. That's often because CISOs believe that, if it's a persistent attacker, they could always find some way to find a foothold and use various social engineering skills. So they typically want the red teamers to focus more on the network controls or the application controls or the detection controls and response controls, as compared to the security awareness and of the end employees of the organization, right? But yeah, we do see a lot of those scenarios as well. There's another question which talks about what's the suggested frequency for red team assessments.
So the frequency, I would say at a minimum once in 6 months, but also depends on the nature of business you're in and the size of the organization. So we recently had one of our clients wanted to do a red team assessment, one red team assessment. I mean, once in 6 months. So after we were done with one, after looking at the report, I think in the last 4 months, 4-ish 4 months, we've done 4 red team assessments for them. So it typically depends on the security posture, and I don't mean in the sense of have you done pen testing, have you fixed all the vulnerabilities, but the realistic or the true security, what the security posture is, and uh, and how you're remediating issues, and then you want to revalidate the fixes that you've applied and stuff.
Gotcha. Okay, so it completely depends on the scenarios till the time it's being achieved, till that flag is being achieved. Testing continues. There's a follow-on question by the same person who's asked, how frequently would you suggest penetration testing?
Uh, the right frequency would be every time you make a significant change in your application or the environment. But again, at least once in 6 months for that as well.
Gotcha. Okay. There's another question which says, how can anybody start a red teaming activity in any organization, and what are the things that they should be careful of?
Was that how or when?
Uh,
Could you say that question?
no, how can anybody start red teaming for a particular organization, and what are the things a red teamer has to be careful about? I've just rephrased the question, but yeah.
Okay. So the first phase, of course, would be I'm assuming we've established objectives. So the first phase would be to get as much intel as you can on the attack surface. And then once you have enough intel and you're comfortable with the knowledge that you've gained through the recon that you've done, then start stitching an attack part together. And things that you need to be careful about is understanding how if the network inside is sensitive, if there are critical servers which you don't want to touch or shouldn't be touching, which would cause disruption to services. I think these are things that you typically want to be careful, irrespective the kind of assessment that you're doing.
Gotcha. All right. Okay. The next question is very interesting. Can you illustrate examples of controls that most often fail, even though organizations think that they won't fail them?
I think it's typically to do with uh, detection, because you have monitoring in place, and you're assuming that you will get alerted in case of an attack. But that's something that we've seen failing, right? Uh, a lot. So it goes undetected. And plus, I think the key to red team assessment is stealth. So the red teamers go under the radar and they're able to perform these attacks that they are. So I think that would be a key failure in most organizations that we've seen.
Gotcha. So I think detection is
Yeah,
definitely a big one, right? Most often organizations don't know, right? And the first step to knowing whether you're under attack or whether you've been breached is detection, right? And then
right.
the follow-on response.
Response, yes.
Yes. All right. Great. I think those are some of the questions that we have. I appreciate we got a bunch of questions, some great questions there. We appreciate everybody's time to join today's webinar. So thank you. Without further ado, these are contact information. You can feel free to reach out to Ashrita or I on LinkedIn, and we'll be more than happy to answer any further questions that you might have. With that said, I appreciate your time again. You have a great rest of the day. Good afternoon. Bye.
Thank you, Gwen.